Welcome in Big Ten Today on a Wednesday. It is great to have you with us. Dave Revson and Anthony Herron getting set to call the Cy-Hawk battle this weekend here on the Big Ten Network.
Got a new suit ordered, Dave. I'm going to be suited and booted at Kinnick Stadium. Can't wait.
You do not show up for the Cy-Hawk battle in an old, tired suit.
I mean, how could you?
Yeah.
It's the Cy-Hawk, man. You got to be ready.
I'm guessing there'll be new suits throughout the stadium for that one. No, it's great. I mean, it's part of 8 games that we have on the Big Ten Network. This is the first time we've had the Cy-Hawk game. It is an enormous game in the state of Iowa, and fascinated to see how the Hawkeyes come out, frankly, after their performance in week 1. Yeah. So Anthony's here. SI's Pat Forty is with us as well, as he is every Wednesday. And Pat, coming back off of a experience at the Shoe. You were at the biggest game of last weekend.
Yeah, unbelievable atmosphere, as you would expect. 100-year-old horseshoe looks as good as new, and Ohio State looks a bit rebooted and reborn as well. Very impressive performance finishing that game by the Buckeyes.
Yeah, fascinated to talk it through with you guys. Some thoughts on maybe what it means for Ohio State going forward. But I did mention our big story and want to at least give you a sneak peek at that. It is the release of the women's hoop schedule. A quick overview for you. Everyone plays at least one game in early December. Most play 2. Nebraska at Maryland, probably the headliner there. That is December 4th. Indiana and Iowa play twice in the final month, including the last day of the regular season. That is a day that features 6 conference games. New Year's Eve, New Year's Day are loaded, with Ohio State hosting Michigan and Nebraska at Indiana, perhaps the most intriguing there. Lots more on this schedule, including Megan Kahn and Megan McEwen coming up in this show. Football, the new AP poll came out yesterday. Despite beating the number 5 team in the nation, Ohio State actually moved down a spot, but that is probably really more about Georgia moving up after just annihilating Oregon. Michigan up 4 spots as well. They are now number 4 in the country. That's tied for the biggest jump in the poll. Michigan State up a spot to 14. Wisconsin down 1 place. They are number 19. Again, we are fired up. This is a huge week of football here on the Big Ten Network. We have 8 games. Among them, we will have Ohio State on our air. 3 of those 4 ranked teams. Let's talk about the Buckeyes first. And we know what happened against Notre Dame. Really grinded out that win, ran the ball down their throat in the 4th quarter. What does it tell you, Anthony, about the Buckeyes here moving forward?
I love the potential that they showed with the way they finished that game, Dave. And you know, I've been banging this drum a lot about the Ohio State run game, even throughout the season last year, and perhaps leading with that. And the game the other night struck me a bit like the 2020 Big Ten Championship game, where you got through the first half and it was a passing attack that didn't necessarily seem like itself, that wasn't really able to move the ball as effectively as we normally see it. And so being off schedule in that manner, it took until the second half of that game when we saw Trey Sermon emerge, we saw Ryan Day's approach, saying that, you know what, let's push this team around. And my hope is showing that willingness at the end of the game to just go mano-a-mano with the Irish. That's something that Ohio State will recognize they can build off of, and maybe not wait until the second half of the game to have that be a featured part of the offense.
And keep in mind, too, I mean, Notre Dame is a good line of scrimmage team, a really good defensive team.
On each side of the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to be able to kind of exert your will against them, it is very different than some of the other games we saw Big Ten teams play. I mean, this is a real measuring stick game. And to your point, we saw that willingness. Pat, you run 20 plays in the 4th quarter, and all but 4 of them are running plays. You don't really think about that from Ohio State, but that was what we got. And we also got a really good defensive performance, which isn't something we thought about with the Buckeyes last year.
Right. Those are the 2 question areas, right, coming into this season. Ryan Day was so tickled afterwards. I mean, one of the things he said, a lot of people questioned our toughness in the offseason. I've got to watch the film, but you tell me that isn't a tough team. He got what he wanted to see out of them on both sides of the line of scrimmage there. They paid Jim Knowles nearly $2 million to come in and activate that defense, to get those guys flying around, to get them attacking and aggressive, and they did that. They really dominated Notre Dame in the second half. And then, yeah, to Anthony's point, offensively being able to just pound the ball behind Paris Johnson, and then DeJuan Jones, 6'8", 359, the other tackle. A lot of beef to run behind there, and to be able to do it, I think that's exactly what Ryan Day wanted to see, especially when Jackson Smith and Jigba got injured early and is out of the game. And, yeah, that kind of bulked up the passing game. So what's plan B? Hey, we can tough it out when we need to against a good team at the line of scrimmage, as you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw it was interesting when we were at camp. I mean, you look at that offensive line and you think back to the Michigan game in particular when they could not run the ball when they needed to run the ball last year. You look at that line, you look at the backs, and you say, well, why not? and maybe it is just about kind of what you emphasize, and certainly an emphasis on it down the stretch in that game. Again, Ohio State on the Big Ten Network on Saturday against Arkansas State. We will have Michigan in prime time as well. They will take on Hawai'i. Again, this is a cushy non-conference schedule.
Right.
And yet, in my mind, there is a ton of intrigue around this Michigan team because of the quarterback spot. And we saw them in the opener, and Cade McNamara was fine, but J.J. McCarthy came in and clearly gave them a spark, and now it's McCarthy's turn in the spotlight on Saturday night.
I don't have any real concern yet for how Jim Harbaugh and Michigan have been handling this. I know that concern is beginning to grow a bit at this point and partly because of some of the comments Cade McNamara had after the game. But I don't believe anyone needs to overreact to that. For a competitive player to say that, yeah, I had a little bit of frustration about that, and I believe I should be the starter. That's what Cade McNamara told me in Indianapolis when I interviewed him at Big Ten Media Days. That's expected. That's to be understood. He's a championship quarterback from last season. But you do have the enticing potential of J.J. McCarthy. And because of this non-conference slate that you've been talking about for so many weeks now, it feels like this ability that Jim Harbaugh has to test the waters at quarterback, just like we've seen him test the waters at quarterback as a professional head coach, and see if perhaps the talents of McCarthy can ascend the ceiling of this Michigan offense. So it's an opportunity that J.J. McCarthy, I believe, deserves. And Jim Harbaugh's in a position to give it to him because of the opponents they're facing.
It is a fascinating spot, though, given everything McNamara did last year. I mean, you win a Big Ten championship, hadn't done that in 16 years. You beat Ohio State, first time they've done that in 8 years. And the reward is you find yourself in this quarterback battle. And now McCarthy gets the chance kind of to go second here, Pat. And really, after making his presence felt in that first game against Colorado State, really to, with emphasis against an inferior Hawaii team, state his case.
Yeah, right. An even more pliant defense, it appears, for the Rainbows. So he could put up a big game there. And I agree that Cade McNamara's subtle dissatisfaction publicly, I have no problem with that. That is human nature. It's actually being honest as opposed to, no, I was really happy with the way things were. Oh, okay, yes, he's a competitor, and he has been a team leader. Look, last year I was there in East Lansing. They lose a gut buster. Who does Jim Harbaugh send out to talk to the media? Cade McNamara and Aiden Hutchinson. You're a leader. You're in that position. You lose the Orange Bowl. He's the one out there out front. So you get the glory, but you also put up with the responsibilities in tough times. I'm sure he's feeling like, look, I've given this program everything. I believe I should be the guy. The only problem is you got a guy behind you who's really talented too. So I don't blame the guys for how they're handling it. I don't blame Harbaugh for the way he's playing it. We just got to let it play out. But it's pretty intriguing, as you said, for what should be a couple of mismatches here to open the year.
And guys, I feel like the timeline, kind of the threshold of it, right now, I don't think we're beyond a threshold where it could affect Michigan big picture-wise. You certainly don't want this going deep into the conference schedule or something like that where you're maybe vacillating back and forth about who your starter is going to be. But for now, you're one game into the season. I think everyone's fine. Michigan's fine for now. And then we'll see how long it takes before a decision's really made.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, by the time you get into conference play, you clearly want to know. Jim Harbaugh, the statement that he released seemed to imply that going into Game 3 against Connecticut, another vastly inferior opponent, frankly, that they would have a decision. But again, he can kind of handle it whatever way he wants. But it's fascinating.
They make no guarantees about Week 3. Just, we'll see. We're hoping. We'll see.
Pat mentioned Michigan State. We got our first look at them, and maybe let Western Michigan hang around a little more than they wanted to. They have Akron this week, so again, a game that feels like it should be not as challenging as some other non-conference clashes. But what did you take out of seeing the Spartans after that breakthrough year last season?
I did see a Peyton Thorne that looked a little bit off schedule. I'd say the quarterbacks throughout the conference, a lot of them didn't necessarily look as sharp and as efficient as we may have anticipated going in, but it is Week 1. And I think beyond Peyton Thorne, we saw multiple running backs. It's very important for Michigan State to be able to set up their shot plays the way Mel Tucker wants that offense to run with Jay Johnson calling the plays. Let's run it. Let's lead with the ground attack and look for chunk yardage in the passing game. So at least that approach is still there with the way Jalen Berger began to emerge throughout. And Jarek Broussard looks like a more than capable supplement to that rushing attack with the talents he brings to the table. And I thought the offensive line really moved guys pretty well too. So overall, the offense, while it wasn't as efficient and as targeted and accurate maybe, but I thought that from a Spartans perspective, multiple receivers without even Jaden Reed having a huge impact on things with electric plays, it's something to build off of and grow from. And then a pass rush. You may have a special pass rusher there in East Lansing also. It's a lot of positive signs.
Yeah, Windman was fabulous with the 4 sacks. But to your point, Peyton Thorne, 50% passing, but 19 yards per completion, Pat, that'll get you somewhere.
Yeah, no, they look like they've got the ability to make big plays in the passing game. Obviously, we know Jaden Reed can do it, but Keon Coleman, who showed flashes last year, but had some real explosiveness there. I looked at just the bodies of Michigan State, and I see guys who got after it in the weight room in the offseason. I mean, they did some work there. Jarek Broussard looks much bigger than he did at Colorado, and some of the other guys, too. Skill position guys, down linemen, the front 7 defensively, they've got some impressive physiques on them. I think they're going to be fine as they continue to fine-tune things and come along. And, yeah, to your point about the pass rush, that they struggled badly in the secondary last year. They should be better on that end, but one way to make the secondary better is to not give the quarterback time to pick it apart. And with a pass rush like that could play to their defense's advantage.
Yeah, and to your point, longest completion they gave up 22 yards. So where they got gashed some, people throwing it over their heads last year. Did not happen in this one. Quick thought on Wisconsin. You can't read too much into a game against a very mediocre, frankly, FCS team in Illinois State, but big plays aplenty for sure.
Running it in the way that they did is obviously going to be huge for Graham Mertz, as it was the other day. So that matters. And the run after catch was huge in Graham Mertz's numbers as well. It's not like he put the ball in harm's way. That's the formula the Wisconsin Badgers have always been special at, as Paul Chris has been the head coach. Defense, maybe a little vulnerable, some yardage given up, both running and passing for the Badgers, but so much youth, only 3 starters returned.
Yeah, it was interesting, that first drive, the one that ended in the Torchio 100-yard interception return. I mean, Illinois State marched the length of the field on them. Obviously, there wasn't much more of that, though, as the game continued, Pat.
Yeah, right. I mean, look, that defense with Jim Leonard should be fine. They do have a lot of holes to fill, but year in and year out, you know they're going to play on that end. And on the other side, welcome back Graham Mertz. I mean, he had a nice high-efficiency game, and it's just been tough to see him struggle since that opener of 2020 all through last year. Didn't lose his confidence. The coaching staff didn't lose the confidence in him. Had a very nice debut. Good for him.
Indeed. 13 straight completions at one point, so we'll see whether he's able to carry that forward, because if they are balanced on offense, look out.
Dangerous.
The Big Ten women's hoop schedule released today. Opening weekend has become a tradition with both the men and the women, everyone in action. Among the headlining teams, Indiana hosts Illinois, Iowa goes to Wisconsin, Maryland welcomes Nebraska, matchup of 2 NCAA tourney teams from a year ago there. Michigan begins life without Naz Hillman against Northwestern. Ohio State will be at Rutgers. Let's get to our big interview. Megan Kahn is the vice president for women's basketball for the Big Ten. She joins us now. Megan, it is great to have you with us. I know this is an odyssey to get to this point. So tell us what it takes to get from a blank slate to what you're releasing today, a full conference schedule for all the teams.
Well, thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. I can tell you we thoughtfully and intentionally poured. We used every second we had available to put out the most competitively balanced and equitable schedule that we could. We're not only looking at their single and their double play opponents, but we're looking at the sequencing of their home and away games. No team ever plays 2 games on the road away, or 2 games in a row at home. Every team has 4 or 5 home weekend games. We know weekend games are critical and significant on campus to engage the community and draw higher attendances. We're looking, of course, at television partners and them requesting certain matchups on certain days. We're avoiding conflicts either with the men's team or ice hockey or wrestling or other things going on campus, and the sequencing of those games and trying to put together the most equitable and fair schedule we can for all 14 of our teams.
Well, that sounds daunting, to say the least, Megan. Tell me about the 1 plays and the 2 plays. I think that's really interesting to people. How do you determine that? Do you try to project who's going to be good and try to balance it out? Is it random? How do you decide?
We do. In our scheduling model here in the Big Ten, we've elected that we're going to play tough teams are going to play like teams, and teams in the bottom of our conference are also going to play like teams. And so every team will play 5 home and away opponents, and then the other 8 teams are split at 4 home and 4 away. So we do a process internally, as well as we have an accountability factor now in place where our coaches are all a part of that process and predicting the strength of the teams for the following season, which helps us tier and then match up those 1 and 2 play opponents.
You went from a 16-game conference schedule a few years ago to an 18-game conference schedule. You've continued to do that here. Is that something you anticipate as we go forward and add more teams to the Big Ten here in a couple of years, that you'll remain at 18 conference games?
Well, 18's been very good to us, given the success of our teams in the NCAA postseason. I think we've had 19 NCAA tournament selections in the past 3 seasons. The last 2 years, we've had 4 teams advance to the Sweet 16. The last 2 years, we've also had an Elite 8 team. What the future brings, I'm not sure. We'll have to continue to evaluate what the national landscape is showing us, how that might impact and enhance our student athlete experience. Certainly have conversations with our head coaches and our campus administrators, and really how strategically we can build our conference schedule to best position us for postseason success.
One of the things that I know we're really excited about this year is bringing the women's tourney to Minneapolis for the first of 2 years there. So that is something that's going to be big. Media days will be there for both the men and the women as well. What else should Big Ten women's basketball fans be looking forward to this year?
Yeah, I'm actually at the Target Center right now on a site visit, preparing for our upcoming media days on October 11th and October 12th, as well as the enhancements of our tournament. I'm really excited to bring our fans, our teams, our student athletes to a new city and give them a world-class experience. I can tell you that if this season is anything like last season, we're in for a treat. Our matchup and competitive equity of our brand of basketball, it's fast-paced, it's exciting. We have arguably one of, if not the most exciting player in Caitlin Clark in all of women's college basketball. We have probably National Coach of the Year candidates. We have legit Final Four contenders. And last year we saw that regular season title up for grabs until the final game of the season. And if we have anything like that, I promise you it's going to be exciting and have our fans on the edge of their seats.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I was looking at that last day of the regular season, and certainly you look at the teams that are playing one another, it's not out of the question, Megan. We could have it come down to that final day as well. Finally, I want you to reflect a little bit. It's been about a year, a little less than a year, since you took this job. You became the first ever vice president of women's basketball for the Big Ten. What are the biggest things you've learned in this role, and what kind of excites you here going forward?
Well, I can say arguably that I have the absolute best job in all of women's college basketball. I thought that when I took the job, but I can officially confirm that now 8+ months. And I've spent a lot of the last year listening, learning, building relationships with our coaches, our teams, our campuses, our media partners. And Dave, we have phenomenal coaches and student athletes in this league. I wake up proud and excited every single day to continue to elevate what we're doing here. What I've learned is it's about relationships and about showing that we're fair and equitable. And I have the coaches' backs day in and day out. I want them to know that I care about their individual success as much as I care about the success of the conference. And, I worked really hard coming in this year in the middle of COVID and started and trying to build those relationships was a very interesting time. But I love what I do. I love who I work with, and excited about where we're going with the enhancements, especially you referenced media days and our upcoming tournament this year in Minneapolis, March 1st through 5th, and how we're really going to elevate that and put our tournament on a new level.
Megan, it should be great. Year one, I know, is a rousing success for you. Congratulations on all you achieved, and looking forward to working with you here going forward and to watching Big Ten women's basketball this year. Thanks for taking out some time on what it sounds like is a really busy day.
Thank you, Dave.
A little bit more on this schedule. We dive into the matchups. We highlighted the opening weekend already. How about the last week of December for Michigan at Nebraska and Ohio State back-to-back? Huskers then turn around and play Indiana New Year's Day. Understandably, there will be a lot of focus on Iowa this year. You heard Megan talking about Caitlin Clark. Monica Sonano's back as well. See a couple of their games here. They also play Maryland twice in the final month. Indiana figures to be quite good. Grace Berger, Mackenzie Holmes, might just come down to the Hawks and Hoosiers February 26th for the conference crown. Megan McEwen is here now, Big Ten women's basketball analyst, to help us break this down. We might be setting the all-time record for the most Megans in one segment. We'll have to get research on that to confirm.
I mean, that's the research we need to know the answers to, but it's a Megan segment, and what better else?
Absolutely. All Megans all the time. Couldn't be finer. Big picture, just give people a sense, and I kind of hinted, and obviously Megan and I hinted a little bit at who some of the big teams should be this year. But for people who maybe didn't follow the portal that closely, and that's become a big part of it, don't know who graduated, recruiting, give us a sense of who's at the top of this league prognostication-wise.
From last year to this year, the top of the league looks very similar. In fact, I would say the top 6 include all 6 teams that made it to the NCAA tournament: Iowa, Indiana, Maryland, Michigan, Ohio State. And there's another one in there, Nebraska in there. That's the one I was thinking of. And what's interesting is all of these teams, yes, they lost some key starters, but every coach was able to go into the transfer portal and get great starters from Power 6 conferences across the country. So there's not a huge drop-off when you look at all these teams from last year to this year. You talked about Iowa. Iowa has all 5 of their starters back for the 2nd straight year. This is going to be year 3 now with all 5 starters. So that's a team I'm picking as the early favorite to win the Big Ten.
Okay, so you think Iowa's on top then. Who would it be after that? Is Indiana, Maryland, like kind of who fits in right after that?
On April 1st, I would have said probably Maryland, but on September, whatever today is, the 7th, I'm saying Indiana because of the work that Terry Morin was able to do in the transfer portal. And not only did they go out and get Minnesota guard Sarah Scalia, who shot 41% from 3 last year, they were also able to get Sydney Parrish, who's a forward from Oregon. She's originally from the Indianapolis area, but made 52 threes in the Pac-12 last year, and then getting Alyssa Geary at forward from Providence, who's just 6'4" and a great shot blocker in the paint. So to me, Indiana, with having Grace Berger back and Mackenzie Holmes, is also going to be a tough team.
I remember a team that made it to the Sweet 16 last year before losing to UConn. Let's dive a little bit more into the actual schedule. Is there a team that you look at and say, man, that's really challenging?
There are, it's funny, looking at just everybody in general, I would say the schedule is pretty evenly matched, but I take a look at Michigan's schedule, and I think they have a pretty tough gauntlet when they get into conference play. They have to play 3 games in 1 week twice, which is always hard just to turn around, make sure you're well rested for scouting purposes. And they have to play home and away against the top teams in the conference, 4 teams. So that's half of the top teams in the conference. So having to play, Maryland twice or Ohio State twice, those are always tough matchups. Now, Michigan took care of Ohio State twice last year, but still to have to play all those teams 2 times definitely factors into how it plays out down the stretch with standings.
And that an Elite 8 team a year ago, they of course lose Naz Hillman, but some real talent back, Leah Brown, Maddie Nolan, among others for that team. What do you see as the most important games? We've highlighted some of them. The full schedule release is coming up here at the bottom of the hour. You can check it out on big10.org. But as you scoured this and you were telling me you had everything laid out, right?
Papers everywhere.
Your charts
scoured.
and your graphs and
I know.
figuring out.
It was a mess in my living room.
What did you see as the biggest games?
Well, if I had a magic crystal ball, which I left at home,
Yeah.
I would say that to me this season is going to come down to Indiana and Iowa probably vying for a crown at the end. So that last game, and we love drama, Dave.
Yes.
We love the drama, and that's set to be the last game of the season, Iowa and Indiana playing against each other. So that to me is going to be the biggest matchup foreseeable, but you never know how things are going to shake out. You could have a surprise team. I think Nebraska could be one of the most dangerous teams in this league. They return a ton of starters from last season. They added some key pieces from the transfer portal. You just never know how this is going to shake out.
Well, they were a great story last year. Jazz Shelley, obviously the transfer was incredible, and then Alexis Murkowski turned out to be Big Ten Freshman of the Year. And really a fabulous player, a ton of fun to watch. We'll obviously dive a ton more into this as women's basketball season approaches. We got media days coming up next month. You're focused on football, though. Where are you going this week?
I'm going to Michigan this week. So be down there. Hopefully you get to see the women's basketball team as well. But Michigan football playing Hawai'i at 8 p.m. First time in the big house.
How about that?
I know.
Wow. You will love it.
100,000 people, I
Yeah,
hear,
there's going to be a lot of people. I think some of them might be focused somewhat on that quarterback battle.
That's fair. You know what? There's a little bit of drama in Ann Arbor. Can't wait to figure it all out.
All right, Megan McEwen, great stuff. Thanks so much for spending a few minutes here with us. And here's what happened to the Big Ten West in Week 1. Again, they dropped the 2 conference head-to-head games, Purdue and Illinois, both losing to teams from the East. Everyone else won their non-conference games. Some performances, of course, more convincing than others. Remember as well, Northwestern already has a conference win. They topped Nebraska in week 0. They were actually off last week. So, Anthony, based on what we have seen to this point, which admittedly is limited data points, but it's more data points than we had a week ago.
That's fair.
So,
yes, and accurate.
Has anything in your mind changed in the West race? How do you see it playing out at this point?
I still feel really good about Minnesota. I think the Gophers are such a strong team, a complete team this season, and their execution looked like it in week 1. Not only both running backs, both healthy running backs in Muhammad Ibrahim and Trey Potts having an impact on the game, an efficient performance from Tanner Morgan, a defense that goes out there and pitches a shutout. First home shutout they've had since 2006. So I feel great about my preseason Gophers prediction. I do feel like, I talked about Wisconsin in the first segment. Those are the 2 at the top of the totem pole. Going to get a look at the Hawkeyes in person this weekend. I'm looking forward to that. And I was thinking a bit. I got one of those Facebook reminders from earlier this week. The game I called a game on the Big Ten Network back in 2009. The UNI, Northern Iowa, almost defeated the Hawkeyes in the opening game of the season.
Like block field goal?
Back to back. Had to block 2 chip shot field goals. Broderick Benz blocked the second one right here on the Big Ten Network. I got a reminder about calling that game years ago. Iowa narrowly defeated UNI, went on to whoop Georgia Tech in the Orange Bowl that season. So they're banged up at receiver. They've got a guy trying to replace Tyler Linderbaum at center who's trying to walk the same path. He was a defensive lineman a few months ago in Logan Jones. So don't rule out that the offense will get better. It likely won't get much worse than where it's at right now. And if they get healthier, Gavin Williams could be back sometime soon, then that defense and special teams was as special as all of us thought it would be. So there are 3 phases to this game. 2 of them were exceptional.
No doubt, and we are prone to overreaction. That being said, the offense needs a lot of work.
It was uninspiring. Very uninspiring.
So we'll see.
Iowa offense.
We'll see. They are certainly acutely aware of it. Pat, what did you think coming out of week 1? How do you have the West playing out?
Just to follow up on what Anthony said there, how many times have we seen Iowa look miserable, then turn around and beat Iowa State? I mean, they have done that more times. Kirk Ferentz has a way of beating Iowa State, which is a very important thing in that state. But the team that I'm still intrigued by is Northwestern. It could be even year magic, but I liked what I saw from them in Ireland, if they can carry it over. And maybe Nebraska isn't the toughest test, but you saw a Fitzgerald team that plays like Fitzgerald wants them to play. Tough, resilient, opportunistic. You're able to run the ball. Skoronski and that offensive line were really good. You protected Ryan Helinski. He got the ball out. Once they got the running game going, they were able to get into the play action, the boots and the waggles and everything else, and they just all worked along with a defense that made enough plays. So big game against Duke, I think, this weekend, because the winner of that, they're both 1-0, somewhat unexpectedly. Winner gets to 2-0, and you could maybe see 3-0, 4-0 coming. So I'm ready to see whether Northwestern has even year magic again.
I'm with you. I think that's a significant game for them. There's a couple of those Power 5 matchups, Illinois against Virginia. Right. Still interested to see. I still think this is going to be a pretty good Illinois team. But agree with you on Northwestern. Defense wasn't great, but if you can get 500 yards of offense, it's good enough. I mean, they've been so limited offensively in the past couple of years, even when they've won the division. What about in the East? Anything different? Ohio State was the overwhelming pick coming into the year. Do you see the East that way right now?
I feel like Michigan is perhaps even more of a threat than we gave the Wolverines credit for going through week 1. And that's a part of where I feel like the discussion around quarterback is understandable, but doesn't concern me yet, because everything else on the field for Michigan, even the quarterback position, when you factor in 2 guys who seem like they're capable of winning at a high level, that defense was outstanding. The run game was dominant when it needed to be. And they didn't even have to really go to the slew of talent they had at receiver. They just looked like a more than capable squad to challenge anyone in college football. But then also the game I called in College Park, it's a Maryland squad that almost in an easy manner was able to dispatch a rebuilding Buffalo program, but they weren't great. Maryland didn't play great, but that to me, and I talked to Mike Locksley this morning on Big Ten Radio, that looks like a very dangerous squad to me. Because Talia Tagovailoa, that wasn't his most efficient passing game, but it was still statistically marvelous. And then the receivers, they had a couple of drops. Those guys don't drop passes, but it's the opening game of the season, and you're seeing progress in the run game. Love the way they hit blocks up front on defense. Ami Fee now, he's one of these guys I'm ready to put on Big Ant's Brute Squad. So there's a lot of elements there for Maryland that I think Terps fans should be really excited about.
I don't think anyone's going to make the argument that Maryland is going to win the Big Ten East. I'm not suggesting you're saying that, but they will have something to say, I think, about who does, and maybe pull an upset or two along the way. They're clearly very talented. As good a receiver core as there is maybe outside of Columbus. I know in Ann Arbor they perhaps make an argument there too, but they are really talented there. How about for you, Pat? I mean, again, it's overwhelming, right? Everyone who voted in that Cleveland.com poll picked Ohio State not just to win the East, but to win the entire Big Ten. Do you still see it that way, or do you think that it's a narrowed gap or even a closed gap with Michigan or someone else?
I still see it that way, but I don't think it's an open and shut case. I mean, if we learned one thing, I think, out of watching those teams in the East Division, I don't see any easy outs. Rutgers showed some resilience to win on the road. Anthony mentioned Maryland, but how about Penn State and Indiana as well? Yeah. Both coming through with clutch, do-or-die drives to win those games against Illinois and against Purdue. Sean Clifford, he's had his ups and downs. Some Penn State fans might be tired of seeing him out there, but by golly, he got the job done at the end, intrigued by their young running backs. And then Connor Bazelak, the transfer from Missouri in at Indiana. I mean, they had struggled most of the night. Illinois couldn't put them away, and so Indiana said, fine, if you don't, we'll go take it from you. And they make that huge drive down for the winning score. So, Tom Allen has a way of gathering up momentum and getting a team feeling good and keeping it going. I think that was a really important first step for them. So I look at the East and I say we're going to have a lot of good games week in and week out over there.
It does feel like it's going to be really competitive, both sides of the league. It doesn't feel like there's anyone that's totally outclassed this year, and that makes for really compelling games. Speaking of compelling, Pat, the odyssey that is college football playoff expansion. I mean, what better time than late afternoon on a Friday to announce the entire thing is expanding. We're going to 12 teams now. I can't help but to think you see this as a positive thing, but interested in your takeaways on what's coming at the latest in 2026, and I think a lot of us hope earlier.
Yeah, not just late on a Friday, late on a holiday weekend Friday when the first week of the season's going on. What are y'all doing? That's a PR failure completely, but that's been the college football playoff since its inception. This all should have been done a year ago. It is at least getting done, though. This is a good thing. This is good for college football. It's good for the fans. It's good for everyone. 12 teams, campus games, good matchups, more teams in the mix in November where we've seen, things just dwindle down to you're only talking about 6 or 7 schools. And in the final weeks of the season, now we're going to be talking about 15 to 20. A lot more drama, conference championship games that mean more. I just think across the board there are a lot of good things. It's not perfect. It's not without drawbacks. I do have concerns about the academic calendar, about pushing players too far, playing 16, 17 games, about going all the way into mid to late January in terms of intruding on the next semester. So, big football keeps getting bigger. There are some problems with that, but a bigger playoff, I think, is specifically very good for college football, and I'm glad we're finally getting it.
Yeah, I hear you on all that stuff, but at the end of the day, you have to be thrilled with the result, which I know you're saying you are. I mean, 12-team playoff, I think it's great. Nationally, everyone has to feel like they are a part of this. They have to feel like, at least in theory, they have a chance at the beginning of the year. You shouldn't have a situation, I mentioned this the other day, like the Pac-12, where I saw a stat, they've got like a 6% chance now of making the playoff, which whether or not you believe in the math is irrelevant. No one should think that after week 1. That's the beauty of this. Everyone's going to feel a part of it, Anthony.
A lot more teams will feel like they're in the mix. Does it diminish the regular season? Certain games for the teams at the top of the food chain maybe don't feel like they have quite as much consequence to them. But we did also hear, and I think part of the reason this didn't get done a year ago, kind of like Pat was discussing, was structurally there are still some concerns. There are things to figure out, not just, how many teams, how many conferences get automatic qualifiers, but even Jim Harbaugh earlier this week was talking about revenue sharing. We've heard comments from Commissioner Kevin Warren about how athletes get compensated here. And that's a part of this conversation as well. So knowing It'll expand to 12 teams. That's not shocking, and it's good that that's on the way, but there's still some details that'll have to be figured out here. And, if you don't figure those details out, then they can come back to haunt you later on.
The devil is always in the details.
Isn't it?
Isn't it? Yeah. But the big picture part of it, man, it's going to be fun. And I hear what you're saying on those teams at the top, but they're still playing for a bye. And that's going to be hugely important.
Right.
And then you have so many other games that you're going to be able to say, hey, there is an impact in the college football playoff deep into, well, really, I mean, going up until the last weekend of the year. It's going to be fascinating and a ton of fun. And the Big Ten has produced the Doak Walker Award winner 3 of the last 4 years, given to the nation's top running back. Kenneth Walker, the third one at last season. It is, of course, very early, but you see some of the big numbers being put up by conference backs this year. Chase Brown off to a great start through 2 games. Anthony Grant's been fantastic for the Huskers. Roman Hemby over 100 yards in his first start. So there are a lot of good running backs in the Big Ten, which gets us to Big Ant's Impact 5. We are going to run through the running backs and rank them 5 to 1. Where are you starting?
Starting at number 5. I mean, none of these individuals are going to be easy to run through, but I think the fact that some of the backfields are a little bit crowded, it made the list a little bit difficult. But at number 5, I'm going to start in Ann Arbor and go with Blake Corum from Michigan, because I've been talking about how excited I am about Donovan Edwards. That doesn't mean Donovan Edwards is the best option right away to be the bell cow for the Wolverines. Blake Corum, an outstanding runner. Even though his stature is a little smaller, he can run between the tackles. He can receive it out of the backfield, so a very versatile all-around back.
Yeah, you mentioned his receiving. He was 4th on the team in catches a year ago. Again, Hassan Haskins was there last year, Donovan Edwards this year. So to your point, they have a lot of options. Where are you going with number 4?
Only reason I've got Mohamed Ibrahim at number 4 is because I'm just waiting to see how healthy is he, how much does he look like the Mo Ibrahim that we saw 2 seasons ago, or even the opening game last season against the Ohio State Buckeyes. And if he gets back to that guy, he'll continue to climb back up the charts, because his versatility began to show towards the end of that 2020 season and certainly into 2021. And I love the fact that they had to see whether or not other running backs for the Gophers could help carry that load. I would imagine P.J. Fleck will continue to feature that as well, where it won't be 30, 35 carries for Mo Ibrahim in many games this season, because they have other guys who can help out.
Now, to your point, you're talking about a guy who was 2nd in the nation in rushing yards per game 2 years ago, so he has a chance. Speaks to how good this league is, right? Where you've got him at number 4. Who's at number 3?
Number 3 is a guy I chose as the Big Ten preseason Offensive Player of the Year. And we will see. And it's not because Travion Henderson is the only back. As we saw with the way that Notre Dame game closed out, Mine Williams would be right there in the hunt for the Buckeyes as well. But Henderson does have that extra juice, that extra burst in the open field. And now perhaps, we'll see, this is something I will continue to watch closely, as I have for a couple of years now with Ryan Day, just how frequently early in the game he's getting the ball to those running backs. But Henderson does so many things so well. And for, like I mentioned with Blake Corum, a guy of his stature, to be willing to finish runs with impact, to not avoid impact and contact, just love his style and, of course, his ability to hit the home run.
Led the nation in yards per carry last year among those with more than 150 carries. So who's number 2 then?
Number 2 is a guy who, to me, has improved maybe more than any other running back in the entire country since last season, because Chase Brown was already a really effective runner for the Illini, but there's a creativity to the way that he's running the rock. There's a versatility. There's an aggression to the way that Chase Brown is running the ball at this point that goes beyond anything we've seen at any other point in his football career. And he may not, by the end of the season, stay at number 2. When you just look at the first 2 games of this year, there's a size, there's a speed, there's an elusiveness that goes beyond anything we've seen at any other point in his time with the Illini. So I imagine the numbers that he churns out this year, both as a rusher and a pass receiver, are going to be immense.
It's early, no doubt, but he's the first Big Ten player in 8 years to go over 150 yards rushing in the first 2 games of the season. So he is putting up some big numbers. At this point, tops in the nation in rushing. So again, very,
That's
very
fun
early.
to say whenever it is.
It
At any
is,
point in
no
the
matter
season.
at what point you say it. So I'm guessing, given everyone you've said so far, number 1 is Braylon Allen.
It is. I mentioned size and speed, and I don't know that there's any other running back in all of college football that combines those 2 elements, size and speed, as well as Braylon Allen does. I was talking to Matt LePay earlier this morning, the voice of Badgers Athletics, and I asked him, who can you comp Braylon Allen to? He couldn't come up with anyone who made a lot of sense, because the physical dimensions are just remarkable, the speed and power that he runs with, but then an enhanced elusiveness is there as well. I mean, a 90-plus yard touchdown run for a guy who's every bit of 6'2", 240 pounds, you just don't see that very frequently for someone with that ability to run the rock like he does. And obviously, that Badgers offense is going to have no problem continuing to give him a volume of carries.
Really good list, and I think it's accentuated by the people that were left off the list, right? I mean, Anthony Grant off to a great start. Evan Hull is a really good back. Jalen Berger got off to the nice start at Michigan State. It just points out the depth of the running backs in this league. Pat, we'll let you chime in here. What do you think of the list Anthony came up with?
Proper TV protocol would be for now to tell Anthony his list is ridiculous, but it's good. It's a good list. I cannot take major issue with it. So I'm going to say, what about the tandems? This is no longer a one running back sport, right? You got to have two guys, and that's where I look at Ohio State, Michigan State, what they've got in terms of two-headed monsters, so to speak. You mentioned Mayan Williams, and the way he finished that game for Ohio State running between the tackles reminded me a little of what Michigan did last year with Hassan Haskins. Like, okay, it's time to close the game. We're just going to get in and pummel you with the big back. And then I thought Donovan Edwards is a very nice, really multi-talented back for Michigan, who does well alongside Blake Corum, depending who's in there. And the two guys at Michigan State now taking the place of Kenneth Walker with Berger and Broussard. That's a very nice combination mix and match group that you can do a lot with there. So tandems are the way to go right now at the running back position, and there's several good ones in the Big Ten.
Pair and a spare. Wasn't that Mason's line that P.J. Fleck always quotes? And P.J.'s got a pair. He's got two really good backs.
Great stories with each of them as well, right? Recovering the way they did.
No doubt. Yeah, absolutely. We mentioned how huge Saturday will be on the Big Ten Network. An 8-game tripleheader, more than half of the conference plays here. Ohio State, Minnesota, Michigan State, Iowa, Michigan, Rutgers, Purdue, Indiana, all of them in action. It is never too early to plan. Go to btn.com/gamefinder for channel info in your area. And remember, all of the games are on the Fox Sports app. If you have the Big Ten Network, you have access to the Fox Sports app.
Am I allowed to call it an octaheader? Can I just coin that phrase?
If you want to call it an octaheader, yes. We're calling it a
triple
tripleheader.
Your full support. Calling it an octaheader.
We're calling it a tripleheader with 8 games, but octaheader I think is fine too. Call it whatever you want. I call it a ton of fun. It's going to be great. What is the game you are most looking forward to?
Well, I mean, selfishly, I'm going to be calling the Cy-Hawk game at Kinnick between the Iowa Hawkeyes and the Iowa State Cyclones. It's the game I played in as a competitor for 4 years at Iowa, and calling the game this weekend, especially the fact that it's on the Big Ten Network. It's such a heated clash that I'm really looking forward to that one for a variety of reasons, both personal and just sort of procedurally, competitively, some really compelling matchups.
Give us a sense for Iowa State. What do we need to know about the Cyclones, who are 1-0 on the year, have some new personnel? Brock Purdy is finally gone at quarterback. Give us some insight into them.
Well, they've got a quarterback who replaces Brock Purdy in Deckers, who now will have the opportunity to do what he's been waiting for a couple of years now, and be the man for that program, for that offense. He's got weaponry on the outside. Xavier Hutchinson, a really electric receiver out there. So the matchup between Riley Moss and Xavier Hutchinson, and how they move Hutchinson around, will be key to see if they can find some matchups against some of the more experienced pieces of Iowa's secondary there. But John Haycock, the defensive coordinator for Iowa State, he saw what the Iowa pass protection looked like last week. He loves to bring odd fronts, a variety of blitz dogs and zone fires that Iowa's going to have to be prepared for. You would imagine the experience the Hawkeyes have at quarterback should help them figure out the way to shore up protection, but they are still young up front. And I referenced earlier a new starter at center in Logan Jones taking over for Tyler Linderbaum. So, Pat, to me, the Cy-Hawk game comes down to what happens up front, but some of those other matchups are really compelling what happens as well.
Some very good X and O breakdown, but I want to talk about the psyche of this game, which to me is just fascinating. You're Iowa State, and you have been beaten down in this rivalry. I think you've lost 6 in a row. And you look at Iowa this last weekend, you got to say, there's our chance. They averaged 2.7 yards per play. They couldn't score a touchdown against an FCS opponent. We've got to beat them this year. So if you're Iowa State, you feel both confident, but probably a little bit of urgency and pressure here. Like, oh my gosh, we got to win now. If we don't, we've really screwed up. And then Iowa, look, you can only go up from there. You can only get better. A lot of unsettled fan emotions about the quarterback situation. Spencer Petras, can you keep your job through this? We'll find out.
Finally, how about one national game you're looking forward to, Pat?
Well, Alabama, Texas, 2 brand names, big names. I don't think it's going to be a great game. A Texas fan friend of mine, I asked him, hey, you going? He said, I don't like to get blood on my clothes. So that tells you about the Texas mentality, the fragility, I think, how they feel going into this game. It could be a beatdown, but it's an important yardstick for where Texas is in its rebuild under Steve Sarkisian.
Their first down, though, will get all the Texas is back tweets, Pat.
There you go.
That's all it'll take.
Yes, exactly. It should be fascinating, as you say, a measuring stick more than anything. I don't think anyone is expecting the Longhorns, even though they do get that game at home. I don't think anyone's expecting them to beat Alabama. Great stuff. Thanks so much, Pat. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Anthony, final thoughts before we go.
Well, I think overall, man, this conference, just 1 week into the season, seeing the depth of the Big Ten, polls recognizing that as well. So it's nice to see that. But now, especially the quarterback position, I think week 2 is going to have to be big for Big Ten quarterbacks.
We will have our eye on that. Hope you will join us tomorrow. We will release the men's hoop schedule.